So already in my 20s, and again I would say before I could actually afford it, I decided to give myself an unlimited travel budget.
And it's unbelievable that you think that as a human being, if you want to grow in your personal development, but you don't eat, you don't feed yourself, you think that this will just happen by accident.
Just your time wasted on shit. Because
I know, not following my own playbook.
Welcome to Get Your House in Order, where the Medici brothers, investors and entrepreneurs, Chris Auditore and Dr. Philip Zimmermann, discuss timeless principles of success, significance and legacy. A podcast for business owners who want to design a beautiful life and a beautiful business. Sponsored by the one and only exclusive Medici community.
Welcome back to Get Your House in Order, where I talk with my favorite brother, the only one I have who is in the house, about today, money, money, money. The hardest truth about money nobody wants to hear, Chris. That's the subject. Talk to us about money.
You need to spend money in order to make money. This is probably the first thing that comes to my mind when you kind of throw out that principle. Is that you cannot be cheap in your pursuit of making money. And you know, let me explain a little bit on how I started thinking about this. So when I was a teenager, I gave myself the first unlimited budget, and my first unlimited budget was my unlimited book budget. You know, I decided that I will always buy a book if I feel like this book is important for me or for my development. Even if I look at my bank account and feel like I shouldn't be spending that money, I don't have the money, I will just do it. Now, because I turned out to be a ferocious reader, actually, that was a lot of money on books because I just wanted to read a lot. I wanted to develop. So I gave myself an unlimited book budget in order to grow. And I gave it to myself before I could actually afford it. And this is one of the important things that I want to stress here. Later on, I've added a whole bunch of unlimited budgets, and I want to talk about this because I think it's just such an incredible tool. It's almost like a mental hack for yourself, where we can get so easily tripped up. Is that we create space for us just to move, act, and perform without looking at the money that we're actually spending. And, you know, for some this may sound absolutely shocking because, you know, as business guys, we should always be looking at money. Well, yes, you should be looking at money. But again, in order to make money, you need to spend money. And where are you spending money on? Let me just add, you know, one of my other unlimited book budgets, unlimited budgets is my unlimited travel budget. So already in my 20s, and again, I would say before I could actually afford it, I decided to give myself an unlimited travel budget. And what does that mean? That means that if I want to travel somewhere and think it's important, I'm just going to do it, no matter what the cost. Whether the flight costs 1,000 euros, 5,000 euros, 10,000 euros, I don't care. If I feel like I should be making that trip, it is worth my time, then it is definitely worth my money. And there's this funny story of one day I had a business meeting lined up, which I'd been waiting for, in Oklahoma City in the United States of America. I was living in Frankfurt, and I literally bought a ticket to fly for a lunch meeting to Oklahoma City, have lunch with the business guy, which was a good lunch, and then afterwards he kind of asked me, so what's kind of next? Because he knew that I had just flown in. I said, well, I'll go to the airport and I fly back home. And he was absolutely shocked. Of course, that was the hopeful reaction. He was shocked that I would fly out for a lunch all the way from Europe. And I literally did that. And I turned back around and I flew back home to Europe. I literally flew out over there for a lunch. Now, why is this important? Because I basically decided I don't want physical space in between me and other business people to be kind of a limiting factor in my business development. And so I can't tell you how much money I've spent on flying around the world, going to conferences, spending money on visiting people in their office or in their location or at their conference or at their gathering in order to strike a relationship, in order to have a conversation, in order to cut a deal. And probably if you do the hard math, I've wasted a lot of money on that. I've blown through a lot of a lot of cash by doing that. But at the same time, I would tell you that I've made so much money over the years because I did not stay in my physical location, just in my home territory, but I literally flew around the world. So with this being said, I believe in spending money in order to make money, and that means you need to just give yourself permission to spend money, and that's where I'm the opposite of a bookkeeper, and I've frustrated more bookkeepers in my life than I can probably account for. Or they can account for, because I'm really more looking at the top line than the bottom line. I'm looking more at how do we get the sale, how do we get the deal, how do we get how do we advance the company. And then, we need to subtract some of the costs that we have in order to do that. But you actually need to get yourself out there.
Well, there's a lot to unpack there. So let's stay with your first kind of unlimited budget. The last two episodes, I just remember we talked about our grandfather and talked about anecdotes and what we learned from our grandfather. And one just came again when you were talking about the book budget. I remember last episode we talked about how he would have this important relationship with his banker. And I remember one day him coming home and saying that his banker pointed out how much money he actually spends at Hugendubel. And Hugendubel, for those who don't know, in Germany is the biggest bookstore brand. And his banker even called out and asked him, is this all legit that you spend so much money on Hugendubel? And he said, well, in order to make sure that you have enough money to kind of orchestra here in your bank, I need to read, I need to learn, I need to grow, and that's why I spend that money. So it's part of our kind of heritage to say that. It's funny if you want to if you have kids and you want that they grow, you feed them. And it's unbelievable that you think that as a human being, if you want to grow in your personal development, but you don't eat, you don't feed yourself, you think that this will just happen by accident. That just because of life experience, you all of a sudden are becoming wiser or more knowledgeable or grow better. That is the stupidest thing that is out there. Just because you have 20 years of life experience doesn't mean you have 20 years of life experience that really is counted for. It might be the same year lived over and over and over again. You might have lived 20 years, but you don't have 20 years of life experience. You have life experience of 1 year, just 20 times the same stuff. So that's why developing, growing, learning. I remember when I was 17 years old, I was so excited. Because back then basically eBay just started out, and I bought on eBay or some kind of related kind of things where you could bet on bid on things. I kind of got a box for a few hundred Deutschmark or Euro, whatever it was back then, of John Maxwell's leadership VCR tapes, which normally cost a few thousand, and I got them for a few hundred, which was more than I made, in a few months with working. But I got this box. I spent a few months of my salary on this box, and I devoured every day 2 hours for the next months, these VCR tapes, to learn. If you don't know John Maxwell, he's basically the leadership guru who wrote more leadership books than anybody else, to study how do you actually lead well. And I'm astonished that even people who have the money, but also if you don't have the money, that personal development, that wanting to grow, that is not a priority when it comes to really paying your way and investing in yourself.
And we have to say that, Philip, actually, it's not so much a part of our German culture to think like that. And this is probably why we're not very unique Germans. Germany is the country of engineers, and engineers are normally, kind of the ones kind of doing the math, doing the calculations properly, so that the bridge doesn't tumble and fall, or that the building is properly standing. And that's why kind of spending money, lavishly on self-development or on business development does not come so by nature, and that's why I would accredit a lot of our personal development really to money we've spent on conferences, on masterminds, on inner circles that we've participated in, where we literally spend hard cash in order to learn and grow and develop ourselves. This is why we've now even started setting this up for other business guys ourselves, because we've just seen what a huge difference it has made for us to spend money. That I have to laugh oftentimes when people, business guys, don't within their budgets have money set aside to fly to another conference on the other side of the world in order to meet people, or they basically spend an hour looking for the cheapest hotel in town when they come up. It just cracks me up, because it just shows me they're being cheap. And I just think being cheap will not get you anywhere. I mean, I have to be that ruthless. I really believe you have to spend money in order to make money. And you have to show up in places where people are actually used to also spending money. And here's the trick. You need to do that before you can actually afford it. And this is kind of where a lot of guys get tripped up. They basically say, okay, only if I have it in my budget, only if I have it kind of in my realm, if I would have never ever been able to create the fortunes and all the companies and all the wealth that we've created if I had just looked at backwards, kind of in the back mirror, like how much, where do I come from, what did I spend last year? That's not 10x thinking. That's not 10x development. That is kind of living in a scarcity mindset. So in a sense, what we're calling for here today is an abundance mindset. A friend of mine always says, Chris, there are a gazillion ways to how to make money. And somehow in our mind, we sometimes get so narrow that we feel like, oh, only if I do this can I make money. Only if I, this is how I learned to invest from my parents. There are lots of even successful entrepreneurs who know how to build a company, but then on the other side have no idea on how to invest money properly. Because oftentimes, investing actually is also a form of taking some bold steps, getting yourself out there. I know some guys back in Germany, they've told me for 20 years, I should buy a building, I should get into real estate, but at the moment the rates are, the interest rates are too high, and the market is not, the prices are, it's overpriced, and that's why I should. And I'm like, well, you're not in the game. You're not spending money now in order to see the fruits in the future, and that's why the biggest advice always is to be in the markets. Same as not just in real estate, but also in the stock market. Well, how do you best lose in the stock market? Well, if you're not playing the game. But if you constantly put money into the market, we've all seen the kind of how that develops. If you keep buying, even if the graph falls, even if the company devalues, that's a time to buy, because on the way up you've actually bought it cheaper. And so the worst mistake is not to spend the money and to invest.
Well, the danger is that that at this point in history, we have so much knowledge available. I mean, we have more knowledge available than on our phone than Bill Clinton had during his presidency. I mean, it's unbelievable. The idea that knowledge is power is just not true anymore. Knowledge is not power, but here's why I'm saying this. Basically, applied knowledge now is the next superpower, and there are some people, especially the cheap Germans, and I'm one of them. I had to shift my thinking there. I'm happy to talk more about that in a second. But to really realize that now with all of the knowledge, all of the great development on the internet, we can grow, and we don't need any programs. We don't need to spend money on a conference. We don't need to become part of a mastermind or a coaching program. That is really kind of fast food mentality. That's how I call it. Yes, there is some nutritional value maybe in fast food, and you can, if you go through Reels and on Instagram or watch YouTube videos, unless it's of course our podcast, basically you get some nutritional value. You feel like you ate something. But because you don't follow you either don't implement what you're learning, number one, or you don't see the bigger picture of how it all works together, it actually is a fake nutrition. And that's why it's so important to become part of programs and coachings where you actually make sure you're joining an environment where they help you apply what you are learning and giving you the bigger map, the bigger framework, so that you know what the next step is for you in order to really see this through. And you can do the test yourself. The last year, after watching all of the stuff on YouTube or on Instagram, how much have you really benefited from that? Compared to really saying, you know what, if you pay, you pay attention. A cheesy way of saying that if you pay for something, even if it's the same knowledge, if you pay for something, you pay attention in a whole different way, and that really has to kind of change.
Well, a good friend of mine sent me an invite to a mastermind a couple months ago, which was a $50,000 ticket to spend a weekend. Which, my German mind is like, wow, a weekend for $50,000. Yes, in a nice location, in a nice hotel. That is a lot of money to spend on a weekend. So that my initial thought was like, this is crazy. Why would I do that? But immediately, because we've been having these conversations and we've seen some of the results, I immediately felt like, oh, I look at my calendar. If I can make that, I will 100% spend that money and participate. Because if you hang out with a bunch of guys and girls it was an island that we got invited into, and do that other realm of thinking together, with their experience, with their background, it can just change my setup and whatever I'm working on. Now, unfortunately, my calendar was blocked, and so I still have my 50,000 in the bank account. But here's why I'm saying that.
You can spend a weekend with me. I make it 25.
Yeah, well, yeah, well, yeah. It's for people who've not seen what kind of results you can get out of being with the right kind of people.
The return of investment is the question.
Yeah, it's just unreal. I've participated with a group that where basically everyone has gone through an exit. If you build a company and then you sell it off to private equity, or you take it public, and you have a nice exit, there's a whole bunch of questions that come up. And I was once part of a group that basically kind of met, who everyone has gone through an exit, which means everyone had lots of millions in their bank account, and it was just absolutely unbelievable on how just being with these kind of peers just absolutely you could have conversations and thinking that cannot be had with anyone else in the world. And so, who wouldn't want to be part of that?
Yeah, so really that the mind shift of not being cheap, and maybe we want to talk a little bit more about that, because I'm on the side where I'm always looking for a deal. That's kind of my personality. That I fall on the cheap side, so to speak. funny story. Just a few months ago, I wanted to actually get so we both drive Vespas here on the island of Mallorca. The most fun to drive a Vespa around the island, and I wanted to get for my cell phone kind of the thing to hold on my Vespa. So I'm stopping by the Vespa shop, and they tell me it's over 100 euros to basically put the thing on my Vespa, and I'm like, 100 euros? That's a lot. And while he's telling me that, I'm looking on Amazon. I see it for 25 euros. I'm like, it's good. I'll think about it. Send my assistant the link. She buys it on Amazon. Make a long story short. My wife tried to put this thing on my Vespa because in my house she's in charge of the handy stuff, and it did not work, this Amazon thing. So I tried to do it, and I broke some part of my mirror. So I had to go back to the Vespa shop, get a new mirror, and was so frustrated and bought this expensive thing, so that I have now a thing for my cell phone for 400 euros that I had to pay the reparation to fix my Vespa mirror, and have now a very nice thing to hold my cell phone. And that's just an example of how, sometimes when we are trying to be cheap, it's actually more expensive, and that's kind of what I want to talk about. About it, even in business. Sometimes when we're cheap, it's more expensive.
Well, and if you just taking your story here, Philip, what frustrates me more than kind of your thinking between 100 euros and 25 euros, which is 1/4 of the price, which I understand in business terms that actually is good numbers. But what actually irritates me the most is the amount of effort it takes you and the time it takes you to take care of the whole thing. Now, if you'd had just bought the 100 euro thing, they would have put it on it within a minute. You would have installed by the shop. You'd have the piece. Now you had to write your assistant an email. It had to be shipped. Then someone needs to pick up the parcel. You need to call your wife to help you kind of on the assembling. Then it breaks, and then you have to go back. So forget just the money side on the price of the thing. Just your time wasted on shit. Because
I know. Not following my own playbook. Here.
Well, and so this is that's why I feel like we need to. There are some screws we need to just adjust differently in our brains, and we all come out of basically by our personality trait or our upbringing. These are the two things that determine how we function. Okay, it's like we all have personality traits. You can take psychological tests, and you come up with some kind of abbreviation what your personality type is, number one. And then, we all have an upbringing, a culture, a family that kind of has taught us how to function. Well, what if both of that is actually not helping you greatly to succeed in business? Okay, because you're staying within your realm and you're kind of just following the formula of your family. And so that's where we need to think this through on another level and just say, does this really help me get where I want to go, or do I need to implement some other things? And that's where being cheap is just a terrible advice for me.
Well, and being cheap is also in business to really kind of realize, okay, if we are cutting costs there, you need to know your numbers. There's no question about that. But the mentality is to say, okay, it can actually become more expensive if you are cheap. Even from the numbers and business terms. I remember a few months ago we had somebody was working for us, but as a freelancer. I think it was 95 euros an hour, and that person did some research and was supposed to buy something for a conference, and was so excited. She told me that she saved 50 euros on some kind of an order. And then I asked her, how much time did you spend on researching to get that deal? And she said, maybe 2 hours. And I said, so you save 50 bucks, but actually I have to pay you 2 hours for actually saving these 50 bucks. And sometimes as business owners, we don't know what we are worth. That's why this number to say, I kind of explain, I use this filter. Hey, my hour is 1,000 euros worth. And if is this now worth spending €1,000 on? Now, the translation to also use that in your private life is a different story, which is also very important and very much needed to say, okay, you're spending, if you're cutting your own grass in your garden, and that's not your hobby, but the chore, even though you are making, in your business, you are saying, you're worth €500 an hour, but you're doing that on the weekend to spend your free time like that, it's a problem. But in business, to really realize that whenever you spend time on certain activities that are less than what your hourly wage is, then you have a problem, and you need to reimagine the way you work.
Well, let me talk about sales teams and kind of your sales department. If you have that within your company, I've worked with some sales teams where I was just absolutely shocked what kind of crappy people they've hired for a crappy wage in order to take care of the most important thing in business, which is to get in some sales. And so one of the things where I have seen endlessly where business guys are being cheap is with their front army, who's kind of out there fighting the war, bringing in the deals, signing the contracts, is where they hire B players, where they actually need the A players out on the front lines. And so, one of the things that I'm endlessly advocating for is to hire the best kind of people you can have in representing your company and actually bringing in the business. This is where, again, being cheap on personnel, being cheap on your representatives for your company just bites you in the ass because you can't perform like that.
And often it comes out of the wrong business model or bad pricing, because there's just not enough money, because you have not really thought strategically through, okay, from what you're selling, how much money do you actually have available to get A players into the door to take care of certain things, and you have not budgeted in, and that is a run kind of a race to the bottom in that case.
Well, I remember, and I'm kind of trying to put the story back together in my head here, that I heard a story years ago of Charles Schwab in the US taking someone through his office, and they came by a room where there was a man sitting with his feet on the table, just kind of looking outside the window, kind of deeply in thought. And the visitor that Charles Schwab was taking through his office was kind of saying, what kind of an employee is that? He's got his feet on the table and he's looking outside the window. Why do you pay this guy, for his work? And Charles Schwab said, well, I pay him $1 million a year. And the guy almost freaked out, like, how can you pay a guy who's got his feet on the table looking outside the window? How can you pay him $1 million? Well, and then Charles Schwab, well, the last time this guy had a business thought, and we implemented it, it brought us tens of millions of dollars into our business. And I've always liked that story because it kind of illustrates that, perhaps you've been brought up with a mindset, you do this and you get paid that. And perhaps really to be playing on another level with your business, you need to change your matrix. There are some people that are worth paying $1 million for their job. Now, if you come out of a hardworking middle class environment, this is perhaps unimaginable for you that you can pay an employee $1 million. Well, let me tell you, it's not. There are people who, bring back tenfold of that and beyond if they are part of your team, and you need to spend the money.
Well, thanks for listening or watching. Pay your way. Think of ways where you feel like I have been cheap, and maybe there's time to level up your game in order to really see something happening, either in your personal growth or in your business, where paying a premium price for something can be actually a much better return of investment than being cheap. And we look forward to hearing and seeing you back on the next episode.